Cognitivist Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into how one single piece of legislation out of Georgia, House Bill 1124, has created this massive ripple effect all across the U.S. We're going to take a really fascinating look at how words literally become law and how those laws end up impacting real everyday communities. So, here is our roadmap for today. First up, the Hinduphobia bill. Second, we'll dive into the key points of HB 1124. Third, we're looking at how hate crimes are defined. And finally, we'll unpack the symbolism debate. Let's get into it. Section 1, the Hinduphobia bill. Georgia recently made a lot of headlines by becoming the absolute first U.S. state to pass a resolution that specifically condemns anti-Hindu hate. Right off the bat, we have to look at the exact phrasing used in the text of HB 1124. It officially defines Hinduphobia as a set of antagonistic, destructive, and derogatory attitudes and behaviors towards Hinduism. Now, you might be wondering, why does the exact wording matter so much? Well, because officially defining a term is absolutely crucial. It's the first step in any legislative action. Before a state can actually protect people against a specific type of bias, they have to put on paper exactly what that bias looks like. Now, this didn't just pop up out of nowhere. There was massive community momentum behind this bill. It was heavily promoted by the Coalition of Hindus of North America, or CONA for short, and it drew some really strong praise from lawmakers, like Congressman Sanford Bishop, who championed the whole thing as a vital stand against bigotry. Plus, the resolution specifically validates the Hindu diaspora's huge impact on medicine, IT, and the arts in the U.S. This entire movement even synced up perfectly with Governor Brian Kemp officially proclaiming October as Hindu Heritage Month. Section 2, Key Points of HB 1124. Let's open up the actual legislation and understand exactly what this text mandates. So the big question is, how does this actually work on the ground? Well, HB 1124 is pretty clear. It directs that state agencies absolutely must consider this specific definition of Hinduphobia whenever they're enforcing anti-discrimination laws based on religion. It also formally authorizes fact finders, so we're talking about judges and juries, to consider Hinduphobia when they're figuring out if a criminal case warrants penalty enhancements. Essentially, it hands the state's legal system a highly specific lens to identify and penalize this particular brand of religious discrimination. But, every law has its boundaries, right? HB 1124 explicitly states that it does not infringe on First Amendment rights. It fully protects legally protected conduct and expressive activity. And it goes out of its way to note that it doesn't diminish anyone's right to engage in speech pertaining to U.S. foreign policy or international affairs. Basically, this ensures the law targets actual discriminatory actions and hate crimes, not just political debate. Section 3, Defining hate crimes. To really grasp the true impact of HB 1124, we kind of need to look at Georgia's underlying framework, which is known as HB 426. Let's walk through the mechanics of this together. It's like a three-step process. First, a designated crime occurs, something like vandalism. Second, a fact finder has to prove that the victim was actually targeted based on a specific bias. And third, if they prove it, enhanced penalties kick in. So that new Hinduphobia definition we just talked about, it plugs right into step 2. It becomes the exact tool the fact finder uses to recognize the bias, which then triggers those extra penalties, like added jail time or heavier fines. Under this broader law, HB 426, which, by the way, was championed by lawmakers like Representative Chuck Strachan and Calvin Smyer, it covers a whole specific list of protected attributes. We're talking race, religion, sex, orientation, gender, and disability. But here is the kicker. On top of the penalties, the law also requires police to file a bias crime report anytime they investigate an incident motivated by these prejudices. This is huge because it ensures incidents are tracked statistically, giving us a really clear picture of what's actually happening out there. To put this whole thing into perspective and to show why states care so much about this data, I want you to hear this number: 59,501. According to the FBI's Crime Data Explorer, between June 2021 and June 2026, there were over 59,000 recorded hate crime offenses based on bias in the United States. That is a staggering figure, and it highlights exactly why state legislatures are focusing so heavily on how bias is defined and prosecuted in the first place. But here's the reality check. Tracking those 59,000 crimes, it is incredibly tricky. As the FBI points out, motivation is highly subjective. Just the mere presence of bias doesn't automatically magically transform an offense into a hate crime. Law enforcement actually requires sufficient evidence to convince a reasonable and prudent person that the action was primarily motivated by that bias. This super high evidentiary bar is exactly why having clear, legally codified definitions, like the key points provided in Georgia's HB 1194, becomes such a massive focal point in the justice system. Section 4, the symbolism debate. Let's zoom out a bit and look at the different reactions this has sparked. Whenever a bill like this passes, it sparks a really passionate conversation, and we see two primary, totally contrasting viewpoints in the source material. Supporters celebrate the bill as a vital tool for protection, visibility, and law enforcement cooperation. Critics, however, view it as a purely symbolic gesture that ignores the systemic, foundational needs of other marginalized groups. Let's impartially break down both sides of this debate to understand what's really at stake. From the advocacy side of things, bills like this are a real game changer because they translate into real-world action. For example, Cohedna uses the momentum from these resolutions to partner with law enforcement for tangible community safety events, like the Suraksha event held with the San Jose Police Department out in California. These events educate the community on hate crime reporting and build critical, proactive communication with local law enforcement. For the supporters, the law is a highly practical bridge to better safety. You can literally hear the legislative pride from supporters when you read quotes like this one from Congressman Sanford Bishop, who said, "My state of Georgia became the first U.S. state to pass a resolution condemning anti-Hindu hate." For the folks backing this bill, achieving this kind of state-level recognition is a profound milestone. It validates their presence, their contributions, and their fundamental right to safety in the United States. Conversely, let's examine the critical perspective, as articulated by cultural commentator The Amazing Lucas. His argument centers on the idea that the bill is 100% symbolic, offering no net new systemic legal power, mainly because underlying hate crime laws like HB 426 already cover religion generally. Furthermore, he expresses deep frustration that Black Americans often lack similar, specific symbolic resolutions tailored to them. He questions prioritizing symbolic gestures over broad systemic reforms, pointing to stalled federal legislation like the George Floyd Policing Act as an example of where he feels energy should be focused instead. This direct quote really captures the core of that frustration. He says, "The bill doesn't do anything, it's completely symbolic. I know there's no law behind it, but it would be nice to show some type of symbolic gesture to acknowledge that there is some hate going on in this country towards a specific group that has been consistent historically." It highlights a desire for equal legislative acknowledgement across all marginalized communities, and a really deep skepticism about the ultimate value of symbolism when systemic inequalities are still present. And honestly, that brings us right back full circle. We've traveled from redefining Hinduphobia, deep into the mechanics of state hate crimes, straight into a national debate on the power and the limits of legislative symbolism. So what's the big takeaway from all this? The laws on our books reflect who we are, but they also reflect exactly what we prioritize. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. How should society best balance specific symbolic resolutions with broad systemic legal actions? It's a huge question, and it's something every voter, lawmaker, and citizen has to weigh for themselves. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and definitely keep asking those tough questions.